So next we're going to assemble the rear steering post assembly. So here are all the components with the post and the lock washer, head cup, and lock nut. There should be a set of 2 bearing retainers or bearing rings, and then this piece which the steering bar will go into. One thing to note is on these bearings, you want to make sure that the ball bearings are all in the rings. Sometimes they fall out and they're in the package. If they are, just pull them out and you can usually squeeze them into the ring, but you want to make sure every one is there before you assemble it. So the first step is to get this cap off the hole here, so you can take a screwdriver or anything small and skinny and it comes right out. So you can dispose of that as trash. So we'll take this post here and we'll take one of the bearing retainers, and this one we want the ball bearings to be facing up towards the trike, and we'll insert that in like so. Take your second ball bearing retainer, this time face it down so the balls are facing the trike again. Next step is the head cup, so feed that on and screw it down quite a ways. And for this one, you want to do just kind of hand tight. Make sure it's on there. Should be good. Should rotate real easily. Next, we'll take the lock washer, and it will look like this doesn't go on very well, but you want to make sure the tab of the washer goes into the slot of the post, like so. And then you kind of have to press it down in, but it should go. And lastly, we're going to take the lock nut and tighten it down, and there is a black kind of plastic part on the top of it that will pop off like so when you're screwing it down. That's just fine. Throw that away. Once this is tightened down, you want to take some pliers and give it just a little nudge. Get it tight. And last piece is this right here. So you can loosen these up and fit it over the top. I don't have it loosened here, but it'll fit right down, and then your post goes in on top of it. Next step is to put the front calipers, the front brake calipers, onto the front wheel. And I like to do this before putting the control arm or the steering arm on, because if that is along here, it kind of gets in your way of putting this on. So I do this first, and it's real simple. Take the nut off, and there'll be a flat washer, and then there are 2 kind of curved washers, and those should fit the surface or the contour of this hole here. So you're going to want to pop this down over the wheel, kind of work it in, and then put that contoured washer back on the back side. Next comes your flat washer, and then your nut, and this is a 10mm wrench that you'll need, and you tighten that down. And once that's tightened down, we can put the arm on. Next, we'll put the steering control arm on. This attaches in the back of the bike and the front, so you'll take the threaded end and fit it into the silver piece in the back here, and you'll screw it clockwise just like you're tightening it. You have to be very careful because this is a very soft material on the silver piece, so it can cross thread real easy. You get this tightened all the way down. You want to go under this piece here on the frame, get it tight. If it doesn't go all the way, you can take this nut and tighten it back up against the silver piece, but it's really not all that necessary because it can't come loose. So then on the front side, there's a black plasticky boot covering this. You'll slip it on top. And take your wing nut wing bolt, excuse me, and get that tightened down. Just get it snug, and that bar is assembled. Next we'll put the steering arm on, and this is where the parent holds onto. So this just simply goes into the piece we assembled earlier, and then take a 5mm Allen wrench and make sure you're straight. So get the wheel straight, get the arm straight, and then tighten both of those bolts down and snug them up. And you're done. Next we'll put the brake cable on. This starts back on the parent steer bar. And the first thing I like to do, and this is my method for doing brakes, there are many different ways, but I found this to work pretty well, is you want to back this bolt off, and you do that by loosening it. And then there is a cutout that you'll see that needs to line up with a slot in the brake itself, the brake handle, and there's also a slot here in this washer. So you have to line all those three up, and I like to loosen it about 2/3 of the way. You'll see why later. You take this end and fit it in. This part can be a little tricky, but if you get them all lined up, then it will fit right through, and then you go ahead and snug this washer down. But make sure you turn that a little bit so that the slots no longer line up, because you don't want the cable falling out. If you do it right now, it can't come out. So we'll take the other end of the cable and pull it, and that will tighten it up there. And the next step is to thread this cable down through the various holes that are along the arm and the steering control arm along the whole bike. So we'll thread those through like so, and move on to the next step. Now we're going to do the front brake. So after you've threaded the cable all the way through, you want to make sure it's long enough to make the loop around and fit in here. But first we're going to loosen these brake pads, because as they come they don't line up, so just loosen them a little bit, and then as you tighten it you're going to want it to squeeze against the metal portion of the wheel, and do your best to tighten back up. It will want to turn on you, so the tighter you can squeeze the better, and do that to both sides. So I'll squeeze it in, fit it up against the metal. You don't want it on the rubber of the tire. That's bad news. To tighten it up. And then the next thing you want to do is this little portion right here. It'll often come loose like this. So I use a 10mm wrench on the brake pads. Now I'm going to use an 8mm wrench for the rest of this, for the most of it. So there's a nut on the back side here, and you just tighten that up a little bit, and it will take that slop out of here. The next move is to take this bolt and back it off about 2/3 of the way, and then take the nut and tighten it back down, and this becomes your adjustment for the brake. So we'll take our cable, thread it through the middle like so, and loosen up with the 8mm wrench. And on the back side of this there's a hole that you're going to thread the cable down through, and keep feeding the cable so that the metal end should fit inside here, and then we'll tighten this back up. Not all the way, because first I want to take this brake and tighten it down. So I'm going to squeeze the brake and pull the cable, and then take my 8mm wrench and tighten this nut down. And then we'll do fine adjustments. Alright, so once the brake is fully assembled, you want to first make sure you squeeze the brake 4 or 5 times. Make sure you take up all the slack in the cable. And then we're going to test it to make sure that it's properly adjusted, and we'll do that by picking the front up and rolling the wheel. And you can see it's pretty good, but it is actually stopping because the brake pads are just hitting the wheel. So there's 2 adjustments we could do. One is in the back by the handle. You'll see that in other videos on other bikes, but on this one, the easiest way to adjust this is right here. And this is why we backed the bolt out to start with, because this adjustment here opens and closes the brake pads against the wheel. So right now they're just a tiny bit too tight. So the way you adjust it is to take an 8mm wrench and loosen this jam nut, back it off several threads, and now when I tighten or loosen this bolt, that's going to open and close. In this case, we're too tight, so I'm actually going to tighten the bolt down, and you'll see that this caliper starts opening wider. So I'm going to do it a little too much just so you can see the movement in that caliper. You see it move? So I didn't need to go quite that much. I'm going to back it off a little bit. And once you do that, you want to make sure, I'll tighten this jam nut down, you want to make sure you squeeze the brake again 4 or 5 times. And then we'll do the same test. We'll pick up and spin the wheel, and you can just hear it barely hitting the brake pad. So I'm going to do the same adjustment again and screw that bolt down just another 1 turn or so and tighten up the jam nut. Squeeze, and now spin. Still just barely rubbing, but that's probably good enough on this bike. And just to double check, I'll spin it, and the brake still works. So that's how you adjust that. Okay, one last thing on this bike. It just so happens that this steering control arm is pretty loose. And what may happen is as this pedal travels down, this, as you're turning, can kind of push out and will contact this the pedal here. So a simple way to fix that is to take 1 or 2 zip ties, depending on the length, and just thread them through here and up into the little chassis fork made here. And just, you don't have to tighten it down very hard at all. Just get it to where this can't travel out into the path of the pedal. And that's a simple solution there. So here I've got 2 linked together, 2 zip ties. I'm going to tighten them down a little bit. That's still too much. Keep going until I know that it's kind of out of the way, and that should be plenty there. So I'm going to cut it off now, just to get out of the way. And then pull this through and cut that excess off as well. And that should prevent that bar from traveling out in the path of the pedal. So the last thing on the brake is to use this small protective cap on the end. Basically just protects the person from getting cut by the end or from the end fraying. A lot of people bend this and stick it back up through some of these areas. That's fine to do, but you just want to make sure that wherever you put it, it doesn't come into contact with the mechanisms. So you don't want that getting pinched. So you'll put this on the end, take needle nose or whatever pliers you got, make sure it's over it, give it a good squeeze, and it should crimp it down on the end. And that's your safety cap.